And we are very fortunate to have Mr. Todd Heather to us. Todd's a very experienced practitioner and a very experienced executive. I've known Todd for a number of years, and I've had the opportunity to work with him in 2 different organisations, believe it or not. And it seems like I follow him around, and it's only been probably in the last 18 months that I've really had the opportunity to work closely with Todd, and I can assure you that he's a very knowledgeable and very generous with his time when it comes to things, all things data. So without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Todd for his presentation on selling and upselling data governance to the C-suite.
Okay, John, thank you. Just to recap what happened on the last meeting, we had a really good meeting last time. We split up into workshop teams, and it was my first experience of having a Zoom meeting split up into workshop groups and come back together again, and it worked surprisingly well, I thought. You know, John appeared in our breakout room at some point, much like that guy who shows up in The Bachelor with good news from time to time. So we workshopped some answers to some questions. And they were, how, as data professionals, do we make it easy for business leaders to connect data governance to business outcomes? What success have you had? What failures and learnings have you had? And we had a little framework that we filled out that was in columns, and it was a list of dot points to say, do this, don't do this, and here are some of the challenges. And John compiled and sort of prioritized the results after the meeting and circulated them to us all. And some of the challenges that were called out by the groups last time were helping the business to understand the value of their data assets. And this was seen as, in the discussion, it was seen as something that was critical because people take their data assets for granted, and they're very likely feeling that resolving data issues is something that's free. It just happens as part of normal course of business, and isn't something that in fact is leaching value from your organization. Measuring data quality correctly and making that quality issues visible to executives in a very pertinent and effective way was important. Funding and costs. Implementing data governance isn't free, and to executives it can seem like a very long journey, and also sometimes a very theoretical journey of striking committees, doing terms of reference, writing policy and papers and procedures. And it's very important that, that there's a strong justification and an ROI, a visible ROI from that work. So it doesn't seem by executives as just something that's a management exercise. Sponsors have to accept the need to solve a problem, but they're looking to technology rather than the whole. Now, this is something everyone in my group responded we'd all seen this before, where when an organization begins to feel that their analytics solution isn't solving their purposes very well, their immediate reactions to go look for another technology. And so we constantly see this churn of technologies to organizations without really getting a lot of value out of it. The people working on data governance are not the benefactors, so there needs to be that constant value proposition that needs to be fed back to the organizations. You know, as a stakeholder in data governance, what am I going to get out of participating in this? And rolling it out enterprise-wide, which is the big deal. I think, you look at, if you're going into an organization that had a low level of data governance maturity, and you were talking to their executives about how quickly they could move to kind of a stronger level of data governance, perhaps on a capability and maturity curve of 3, you're not looking at something that you're going to do in a matter of months, are you? So there needs to be a lot of momentum built up behind that to get it going and to keep it going. So I really enjoyed the session last month. So John asked me to participate this month and reflect on some of those challenges from my experience as a Chief Technology Officer. I was very happy to do that. And I'll give you a caveat that these are my personal impressions going back a few years, and my memory, my impressions do not represent a formal history of what actually happened. But they're sort of my emotions recollected in tranquility, as Wordsworth said. So data governance as seen by a Chief Technology Officer. So I was the Chief Technology Officer of the ATO for 10 years. I'd introduce myself as the CTO of the ATO, EIO, and that got a laugh once in a while. I had a staff of about 450 people, a budget of 50 million. The portfolio included, it's quite a wide portfolio, IT strategy, enterprise architecture, enterprise program management office, management of the IT plan, IT security, technology architecture, testing services, and shared services. Basically, it was the whole of the IT portfolio except for the actual systems delivery part and the actual operations and outsourcing part, which were both very, very big businesses in their own right. I was not responsible for information management. This was the job of the Chief Knowledge Officer, who was hired at about the same time I was. A gentleman named Philip Hines, very, very smart guy. He did a really remarkable job. So I was not responsible for information management, but I was responsible for integrating the data domain into the enterprise architectures and other domains, the business, applications, and technology domains. So that meant I needed to work with the data people to prepare something that could be integrated into the other domains. And for those of you who work with enterprise architecture, you know that in a lot of ways, it's the cooperation between the business model and the data model that drive out the applications and technology architecture. So it's very important that they be integratable, and we work very hard to make that happen. The Chief Knowledge Officer's role, he had, it was a new position in the ATO. He was the first person to take it on, so he had a lot of work to do to define it. I'm not sure whether you would feel that this is close to the role of or the job description of a Chief Data Officer or a Chief Digital Officer these days, but it was, these were the areas that he was looking at. Information management analytics, providing inputs to the organization and design assurance. He didn't own all the analytics units by any means, but he had to support them. He developed information management strategic framework. He did data modeling. He did analytics and reporting, case selection and risk models, records management, reporting. He developed a reporting framework, and he looked after executive information systems. Now, this is his information management strategic framework as he set it up. And this was done in 2004 BD, which was before DM Bach. And so there's really sort of in data management, sort of like in the dark ages, really, in some respects, I suppose. But it was before we had DM Bach as a backbone and overarching framework that we could refer to develop consistency in our industry. We were each doing it perhaps in a more ad hoc way, building on some of the leaders in information management from the 90s and the early 2000s. But he established a set of information management principles, which I think is a very good way to start any kind of strategic framework. And he talked very strongly about the importance of a single source of data, the whole system view end to end, that the information was dynamic and you needed to manage it in a way that respected that. Client needs came first, and the client in the ATO means not just the internal clients, but also the community. And this was a time in the ATO when we were developing the Listening to the Community program, and we were developing a mantra on making it easier to comply, which was a very important, for over 10 years, that was a key mantra in the ATO. Meeting responsibilities, both as a regulator and as a service provider, and then to reduce rework. He had information management quality assurance, and that governance piece was very much there in his mind. He began to establish data custodian, data stewardship structures, data governance committees across the various data domains that he was identifying. And he promoted and promulgated an information management lifecycle, which I'm sure is familiar to all of you. And he positioned various aspects of his business around this information management lifecycle and helped people work with their information across that whole cycle. Some of the practical things he got going, he set about establishing that data ownership structure and data custodianship, as I mentioned. He began formally assessing the quality of data holdings. He drafted a corporate reporting framework and started to document the common business language. He developed practice statements, and he developed an enterprise conceptual data model with the help of David Weeb, who I'm sure will be known to many of you. He's the president of DAMA Australia at the moment. So a lot of this is the right stuff. I mean, I think Philip, I said, he's a very smart guy. He obviously had a lot of experience to bring to bear on raising the ATO's game on information management. And I think a lot of the things he said about doing were the right stuff. And so let me just reflect a bit on how some of the things that we did, how it all went, and what some of the key learnings that we can that I drew out of these experiences are. So the enterprise conceptual data model, it was a thing of beauty. It filled a wall. It filled a very big wall on the second floor of the building that the CKO'S office is in. It was developed as an enterprise data modeling exercise divorced from the major projects that were taking shape. So it was being done as a separate piece of work to develop a foundation for data in the ATO. It didn't respect the fact that 40 years of legacy systems were about to be replaced by packages. So at about the same time that Philip and I arrived, a project called the Change Program was just picking up momentum, and it was going to replace all of the old systems with packages. And so the packages that were going to replace the legacy tax processing systems were Siebel for customer management and case management, and a New Zealand tax system that was going to be the core processing system, but that was going to be basically the seed of the core processing system. Now, both of these packages already had built-in data models. And I'll ask you a rhetorical question. What's the first law of package implementation? I don't hear anybody answering. I hope that you're all screaming in your home offices, don't change anything. Because it was going to be disastrous to try and meddle with data models that were underpinning, particularly Siebel, but also Siebel and this other system. So the conceptual data model, while it was a thing of beauty and it was a very, I think, well developed, very robust description of the data assets that the organization needed, its use was overtaken by the requirement to implement the physical data structures that came with the packages that we had. So it became an interesting artifact. It was used by some developers as a cross-check to make sure that if we map the abstract conceptual data model over the packaged data model, physical data model, and are there things missing that we need to accommodate? So it did provide some value in that respect as a cross-check to over the packaged physical design. But basically, we developed something that we were not able to leverage to the extent that we might have wanted to. So the key learning for us from that was that when you're doing your data governance work, whether it's data modeling or some other aspect of data governance, deliver value to the projects that are underway. And that's a good way of making your value proposition clear to the organization. I think a lot of architecture work, I don't know if this is true, but I was told years ago that there used to be an architecture department in one of the larger, not the ATO, but one of the larger Commonwealth departments that was called the Office of Theoretical Architecture. And to me, that just speaks volumes about what happens in some organizations where architecture becomes an ivory tower exercise that's largely disconnected from the work that's underway. And I used to do a presentation which was called, why is our enterprise architecture like broccoli? And the answer was, everybody knows it's good for you, but it's hard to get your kids to eat it. So the answer in that presentation was you put cheese sauce on it. And you put the cheese sauce on the broccoli, and what you're doing then is you're delivering value quarter by quarter out of the architecture work that you're doing for the projects that are underway. You're giving them insight into the designs they need to have. You're actually helping them deliver what they need to deliver more successfully. So that was my learning about the CDM. Data conversion. So we had the taxpayer records for the entire country, which needed to be converted from the legacy application going back to the 70s to Siebel, and we needed to convert all the old records because, believe it or not, there were still some lawsuits and records issues that needed to be sorted out going back quite a long time. So those records have quite a long tail that needs to be respected. So they needed to be converted from legacy to Siebel, and the supplier was one of the big four system integrators. I don't know if you've ever worked with them before, but their model is to charge, well, in our case, it was to charge a fixed rate per day per person, whether that was a junior person or a senior person. So they ended up, on average, supplying a lot of junior people. who were smart as, they're really smart people, but they weren't terribly experienced. And so the people who were tasked with designing the conversion were smart, well-meaning people, but they had never done something of this scale before. And what they intended to do was to get the data model from the old system, map the source fields to the target fields, program a conversion in the ETL software, and run it over a weekend, a couple of weeks before cutover, check that it was okay, and then go. Well, I had a data architect working for me who was convinced that this was a recipe for disaster. And he and I and the rest of our team found it very difficult to convince everyone that they were embarking on something that was downright dangerous. But with difficulty, we managed to convince people, and it was in particular, it was both the ATO management didn't want to see us disrupting the work of the supplier, getting in the way of the supplier, saying, no, 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 don't do it that way, do it this way, because we had hired the supplier to deliver an outcomes-based process, and we weren't, if we get in the way of their process, then we could be disrupting their ability to deliver their outcomes. So there was a lot of opposition to this, but we finally got permission to access the taxpayer data, which is normally not permitted to be done in a development environment. We need to bring live taxpayer data down into a development environment, and we need to run conversions. And we found so many issues the first time we ran the conversion that we ran 4 full-scale conversions over, I think, 4 or 5 months. And after each conversion, there was a significant amount of data analysis undertaken, and myriad data issues needed to be resolved each time. And when the team wrote the final report about the changes that the things they needed to fix and all the issues they'd found, the final report was over 700 pages long. So while it was hard to get people convinced that we needed to do it this way, and if we had not succeeded in doing this, they would still be fixing the data quality issues in the ATL. It would have taken years to fix, and it would have put the whole change program in jeopardy, because, as you know, if the data is not right, nothing else works. So key learning there is don't underestimate the extent of the mess you'll have to fix to achieve a successful data conversion. Inconsistent reporting and statistics. So it's some sort of basic business statistics like how many tax returns have we processed to date? And when the commissioner asked that question, he would get different answers, and it drove him crazy. And he would pound the desk, and with expressing a great deal of frustration that he could not get a straight answer about simple questions like how many tax returns have we processed to date. And the variation was wider than you'd expect. And of course, there's lots of reasons why he was getting different data from different people. Some of them were relating to actually what was being measured, but some of them were also, the old saying, figures don't lie. But people who were responsible for operational work discovered that they could get, depending on when they took their measure, they could get better or worse results. And so a lot of people tended to, say, do their count at noon on a Friday when they were going to get a 15 or 20% higher rate than if they did it at 5 p.m. on a Monday. So there were lots of reasons for it, but it drove the commissioner mad. And he, working with the CKO, decided that they would have a data quality and reporting blitz. And this was a lot of fun for the people who were involved in it. It was very intense. Each of the business areas was done in a time-boxed 3-month project. And it's moving from one priority area to another. So one part was like returns processing, went on and on to other areas of the business. I think it went on for about 18 months. They moved from one priority to another, and the goal was to cleanse the data, identify the gold standard data sources, and produce certified reports. And these reports were actually certified. So if you wanted to talk about any of the core statistics of the tax office, you were to do it from one of these certified reports. Any other reporting that was done was maybe of interest, but it wasn't certified, it was not gold standard. It was recognized as speculative. So the Blitz ran, I think for 18 months, I said, and created a set of foundational certified information assets, because we needed to create that certified gold standard data, and then the corresponding reports. And this provided a huge asset that was immense value to the organization and gave people confidence that the information that they were using was of high quality and was appropriate to make very important decisions and to help standardize the use of data across the ATO. Also, because there were certified reports, they were able to leverage common means of reporting. So there were some reporting templates that were developed that were rolled out. That meant that there was some standardization in the way reporting was done as well. So it was a very successful project. It broke through a lot of long-standing data issues and created an asset that was stood for great value for quite a long time. Data warehouse and business intelligence. So we had a Teradata data warehouse, and access to the data warehouse was unconstrained. So there was a large community of people who called themselves analysts or early precursors of data scientists, or who were just enamored with programming and wanted to play with SQL. And so there were skilled people and unskilled people. And what happened was you would find the unskilled people launching very expensive queries with joins that were very, very difficult for the system to manage. And so every few months, the Teradata salesman would show up, and we'd need to spend millions for more Teradata nodes in order to have the capacity to meet the capacity requirements that we had, because the capacity that was needed by the skilled analysts was being absorbed by the unskilled analysts. And it was very, very difficult to police. So we had very expensive asset, the data warehouse was being used by a large community. We were often unsure about the value of the asset. Are we getting a return on the investment from this asset? And since I've left the ATO, I know there's been 2 subsequent data warehouse alternative technologies that have been set up, but there's still an uncertainty about the ROI. And I think this is, again, an example of this excessive focus on the technology solution and less on the value of the results that you're getting from it. Now, I'll talk now about the strategic value of data analytics and how you can actually focus on that. Oops. So the ATO invests a lot in data and analytics. And a couple of the things that they focus on a lot in analytics is fraud detection and compliance assurance. So there are a number of algorithms that are run over refunds before they go out. A number of algorithms run on tax returns as they come in, looking longitudinally at the performance of a taxpayer over years and comparing their experience, and creating a risk rating for various taxpayers. There's no question that these analytics have saved billions of dollars in tax leakage over the years. One of the key teams of people doing this were some of the more sophisticated users I spoke about before. Philip had a small team of PhDs who were developing sophisticated fraud and compliance models in SAS and R. These guys were plugged into an international network of statisticians and R users sharing algorithms, and they were developing some very, very sophisticated models of what fraud looked like in a certain industry. And increasingly, fraud, you may have read just today or yesterday in the newspaper about the ATO getting tough with some businesses about aggressive tax planning, moving money around to lower tax jurisdictions. And so fraud is often not necessarily something that's illegal, something that's just a sharp practice, because in the way the Australian tax law is written is if you participate in a financial transaction solely for the intent of reducing tax, that's considered aggressive tax planning and it's against the law. So they're going after some of those people, and I'm quite sure that there's some analytics identifying those cases and helping build the cases against those people. So these guys would develop a sophisticated fraud and compliance models. And when they found one that was paying dividends, it was getting good hits when they went out and actually did the audits, they would then industrialize these SAS and R to run over the data warehouse using Cognos or other tools. And they would not only run it over the data warehouse, but they very interestingly created something that we called operational business intelligence, which was providing the call center people real-time risk assessments to help them make decisions about how to respond to, for instance, people asking for an extension or people calling to make some kind of a payment arrangement. And so the analytics would provide a risk rating to the call center staff to indicate whether this was something that was a high risk or low risk activity. And interestingly, it also flagged the fact that if this person had tried perhaps 7 or 8 other times this week, shopping for the right sort of ruling from the contact center staff, it would make that clear to them as well. So it was a very, very useful set of analytics to help not just do fraud detection, but also help reduce risk in the decision-making processes that were being done by the front order staff. So that was very, very sophisticated stuff, but we also did some really simple analytics, which were also extremely valuable and very pragmatic. So we had a whole suite of industry benchmarks based on the idea that a house painter is going to put in his GST credits for all the paint that he's bought. He's not going to pretend that he bought less paint than he did because he wants those tax credits. And so there were some benchmarks written that says, well, if a house painter bought this much paint, what should his gross revenue be expected to be? And if it wasn't in that ballpark, then auditors are going to have a chat to the painter. And they did this thing to put these same kind of benchmarks in place and tested them year over year and tuned them to make sure they weren't treating anyone unreasonably. And if a painter had a good reason why they earned less money than they used in paint, then that was fine. But it was at least a trigger to go out and start talking to these people. And I guess there was probably a nudge effect as well. But if the ATO goes out and nudges a house painter because of this, word gets around, I'm sure, in an industry that don't try it because they'll get you. So analytics, can even simple analytics can deliver good results. And where you have a value proposition like fraud reduction in the tax collection system, you've got a very strong value proposition. If you can nudge that only by a small amount, you can have tremendous results. So I guess the other learning there is that when the value, apply analytics to places where the value propositions are real.
Todd,
yes.
Nur has asked a question about reporting, and it's quite an interesting one. Have you tried to reduce the number of reports which were never used or never run? Nur says that he ran a Kill the Report project, and the number of reports that they stopped was hard to believe.
I don't recall doing that, but it sounds like a very sensible thing to do. Certainly when we started to do a project like moving from Windows XP to an Office 2003 to Windows 7 and Office 2010, we did something similar. We looked at all the code that hadn't been executed in a long time and got rid of huge amounts of access databases that hadn't been run and a whole range of other programs that hadn't been run in a long time. So it seems like a very valuable thing to do. One of the problems doing it in the ATO was that the reports were being run often by a business unit themselves, and so the fact that those reports might not have been used, it might not have been very visible. But I think that sort of let's look across and decide how many programs can we stop running, how many reports can we stop running is a very useful thing to do. It's really interesting experience doing this without any feedback at all. Okay, metadata. So I was the custodian of software standards. So anyone who wanted any new software had to come to me, and the point of this was to make sure that we only got one of everything. So when we did a survey of the software, and we looked at all the licensing we had. Yeah, we had a large number of large high-value licenses, and we had an enormously long tail of licenses where we had just a smattering of them, and that ended up being a very large amount, a bit like killing reports. We were killing software licenses, and so part of my job was to say, no, we're not going to buy another tool. We found we had 10 licenses for a tool that grew hair on 3D models. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. So when you start digging into this, you find this long tail of software that people either we couldn't figure out why they were using, or the functionality was duplicated by other software, and it was just costing a lot of money in terms of maintenance and licensing costs. So, well, part of my job was to rule on those sorts of things. Say, no, you're not going to get that new software. You're going to have to use the standard one. And people came to me and said, look, we want to buy a metadata manager. And it was going to cost $750,000 for a license. And I said, no. And that was it. They said, okay, and they left. And no one tried to change my mind. No one said, oh, Todd, let me tell you what we're going to be able to do with this metadata manager that will make it pay for itself 10 times over in the investment. The value proposition wasn't sold to me. It was just come to me as a cost. And at that time, I was not deeply knowledgeable about data. I'm metadata. People said, I said, what's a metadata manager? They said probably something like, it's software to help us manage data about data. And that didn't sell me on the value of it, or even on the purpose of it. So looking back on this, I feel I probably lost an opportunity there to make a difference. But the CKO didn't come to me with this. It was more junior people, and they didn't even make an attempt to show me why it would have been a better decision to make the investment. So the lesson here for me is, if you want to make an investment, educate your executives before you ask for the money. Because if you just come in and say, here's the money we want, and here's the product we want, without doing your homework and helping executives understand the value, don't be surprised if you get turned down. Because you're just asking them to do something, or to approve something that may be outside their experience, or may just not be something that's in line with the strategies that they're pursuing. So educate your executives, bring in proposals that are aligned to the strategies that your organization's pursuing, and show how your proposal contributes to those. If you look back at the first few slides on what the chief knowledge officer was doing, you can see that perhaps the metadata manager might have been a strong contributor to some of those aspects of that data management framework, or improving the data management of the ATO. It might have helped us manage those packages better. It might have helped us manage the migration into packages better. But we won't know, because I said no, and everyone just took that as the decision. And the last point I'm going to make is that data governance takes ongoing effort. So Philip Hine, the CKO, he moved on to another role, and another person was assigned the role of CKO, and he was very interested in information security. So he set as his target career to become the Chief Information Security Officer, as well as the Chief Knowledge Officer. So he focused very intently on information security. And so that's where the attention of his staff began to focus. And so 18 months later, I was working on something, and I wanted to understand, I was doing something for another client, and I wanted to understand how things had gone in the ATO, because I wanted to use them as an exemplar with this other client. So I visited one of the the former CKO's SES to make contact, and to sort of pick up the threads of what had happened with data governance and with the data stewardship structure? And the answer was, it was gone. It had disappeared. There were a few people who still had their heart in the right place, but the formal structures had gone, the committees were no longer meeting, the policies and procedures were not being exercised. It was gone. And I think that was, I was surprised because it was, 18 months earlier, it was thriving and it looked like it was strongly embedded in as a cultural change in the organization. So I think there's a couple of messages here. One is that when the senior executive responsible for the area gets interested in something else, don't be surprised if everyone's attention moves to that. So if you want a focus on information management, then you need to have a senior executive who is focused on information management and is not shifting their focus onto something else. But the other point is that the cultural change that sustains the focus on data governance is fragile and needs constant feeding. So I think it's a matter of that, this thing about proving the value to the organization, not just when you get started and not just when you're 6 months in, but building that into your DNA as a data management professional working in an organization so that you're continually keeping that focus on quarter by quarter, what value did we deliver? And if you have a planning focus that's on that, and you're saying, okay, well, what projects are we working on this quarter? What value are we going to deliver to those projects? What value is going to come out of our common glossary? What value will come out of our data issues management? What data will come out of data quality management? Where are we delivering for the organization? And you might even want to make that a report on that, part of your annual report to your senior executives to continue to reinforce that idea that data governance is actually delivering value quarter by quarter across the board, supporting strategies, assisting with delivery, increasing profitability, reducing costs, making work easier, all those good things that organizations want to deliver strategically, and that data governance can make a very powerful contribution to. So that's my final message is sustain that value, make sure it's visible in your organization, and that will reduce the risk of your data governance work fading over time. So just to summarize the lessons, connect your data to work that's ongoing, quarter by quarter, to deliver that value. Look at the strategies and align your work to those strategies that are underway. Don't underestimate the mess that you'll have to fix for a successful data conversion. Deliver some gold standard data and reporting. And I like the suggestion that, eliminate the reports that are just noise. Remember, it's not about the technology, it's about the results from using the technology. And I confess, I don't know how you keep your executives from going after the shiny new technology. If anybody ever comes up with a good technique for doing that, let me know. But I think as long as I've been in this business, one of the greatest things that have prevented good decision making have been executive magazines and and flashy technology. Even simple analytics can deliver value, but the main thing is focus your analytics on things where there's a value proposition that makes it worthwhile. Educate your executives before you ask for the money, pave the way, and work to sell the value proposition that will sustain your data governance and reduce its fragility.
Excellent.
So
that's really good. Thank you so much, Todd. We've got a couple of questions already. First one's an easy one. Mark and Karen have both asked, what is an SES?
Oh, sorry. I've been living in Canberra for too long. SES stands for Senior Executive Service. So there are 3 levels of Senior Executive Service. The first is Band 1, Band 2, Band 3. Band 3 would report to the Minister. Band 2 would be division heads, basically. For a division in the ATO, there were 30 people at that level who were the most senior executive committee in the ATO. And then the SES Band 1 are branch heads, so they would typically run sometimes quite large branches. An operation might be running 1,000 people, 1,800 people, sometimes as small as 50 or 100 people if it was a professional focus area. So they're executive positions. And in the Commonwealth government, it's what everyone aspires to be.
Sounds good. Debbie has asked a question, which is an interesting one. How do you differentiate, or how did you differentiate between information governance and data governance?
I don't recall there being a very strong distinction made in those. I don't see in the strategic governance framework that Philip put together, I don't see the data, information, knowledge, wisdom hierarchy being terribly visible. So I think that we may have been a little bit ahead of that sort of distinction, that framework being used a lot.
Excellent. And yeah, we were going back a few years. I have grown up a bit and actually like broccoli, but
somebody told me I should have said Brussels sprouts, but you don't put cheese. You don't put cheese sauce on Brussels sprouts.
No, you don't. But can you give some examples of some of the sorts of cheese sauce that you should be using?
Well, the first cheese sauce is to make sure that the architecture work that you're doing is being applied somewhere. So that's the most important thing, is to make sure that your architecture work is being applied somewhere in a project. That it's not just being creating shelfware, or that it's not just creating something that a committee is endorsing that's not going anywhere. And so you'll find that the different domains of architecture are different focuses at different times. So be focusing your attention on the domain that's most important. The other thing is, I have a rule of thumb that when I see an architect who's embedded in a project team, and I go down, I visit that architect, I want to see a line of people outside that person's office waiting to talk to them about what they've uncovered, how does this change the architecture, how should I work in this situation. So there needs to be that very practical engagement with the people who are doing the work in the trenches to take your architecture from, because inevitably when you're doing architecture at a certain level, as you drill down to the next level, you discover things you didn't know. And then you need to be involved in adjudicating those decisions to make sure that the higher level architecture is being applied in a consistent and disciplined way as the lower level decisions are being made. And if you're not engaged in those lower level decisions, you're not relevant. And then the other point I think would be to make sure that that's looking down to, say, or across to the projects that are underway. The other thing is to look to the strategy setting people in your organization. Nice dog, John. Now, where's my cat? I know. Look to the people who are setting the strategy in your organization, and make sure that they appreciate the relevance of what you're doing at the higher order architectures and strategies, and how you're aligned to them. So you need to have that sense of being well integrated with the strategy setting part of the organization. And I mean, this is the business strategy setting part of the organization. And if you've got that connection, that also will help provide some cheese sauce to make your architecture more palatable.
Excellent. We got some more questions. Nurse asked another question. Was the CKO reporting to IT or business?
Business. The CKO reported to the second commissioner. He was a peer of the CIO, and he reported directly to the CIO's boss, business, who was, well, the second commissioner was responsible for IT and operations. So his responsibility spanned both the 12,000 people in the front end operations and the 2,500 people in IT. So he sat across both domains.
Okay, so that wouldn't have presented too many problems then.
No, he was connected. He was connected at the right level.
He was connected at the right levels, yes.
Well, and that was one of the good things, was that same second commissioner. He was great, because anytime anybody went to him, the people always tried to end run around me. And so people go, hey, I want to buy this software. It'll be great. And he said, go talk to Todd. So I really appreciate that. That was a big help to make sure that I was connected at the right level as well.
Jason's asked a question: were your governance initiatives implemented as a centralized data office, center of excellence style, or more and educational mentoring implementation across various business silos?
I don't explicitly remember. I think it was fairly distributed. I think Philip actually set up clusters of around a particular data subject, and so I think it was distributed across the business in areas that were focused on particular data subjects in a distributed model rather than a central center of excellence. But Philip had some key people who he would outplace and that would move in and out. So maybe it might have been, you might have considered it as a hub and spoke model or something like that.
Yeah. Debbie's asked a question around metadata management. Would you now see the value in that? And also, when you're thinking about whether you saw the value in it, what would be some of the key selling points or to help quantify the return on investment of a metadata management tool?
Well, I'm about to start wrestling with those questions myself, because I'm about to start working on making a contribution toward the metadata definitions for the Dama Diambok glossary. So I'll be coming to grips with some of these myself. I think that there is an organization I've worked with in the last year that has a very robust metadata manager, and they're a data integrator, and they integrate data from across the whole country, state and Commonwealth data, and they have a very well-respected metadata manager that is of no use to them. So I think that my views of metadata management are likely to end up looking something like, if your metadata manager is basically just a dictionary, a static dictionary, it's not of much use. So this metadata manager is of use to tell people who want to come to this organization and access their data, help them understand what data is there. But once they start trying to move beyond that and to build the analytical databases that they need to, there is no integration of the metadata manager with the actual creation of the data assets. And this organization has recognized that that's where the real value from metadata manager will come, when it doesn't only tell you what's there, but helps you get access to it and helps you integrate that data with other data sources by understanding where the integration points are. And so it's to me, with this organization, I think the brass ring for them will be finding an ability to operationalize the metadata manager so that it's actually embedded in the operation of the use of the data and not just something you refer to.
Excellent. I've got a couple more questions up. Karen has asked, if the CKO was at the right level, then why did the commissioner allow the data governance function to disappear when the new person took over?
Well, the second commissioner who hired Philip went on to be the CIO of Defense. A new commissioner came and had different priorities himself. And I guess it was just a case of the people who had carriage of information management at the senior executive level, as I said, went on to think about other things. So there was no visibility at the most senior level, the ATO executive level, that they were losing anything. There is a tide in the affairs of men, and what's important to you today may not be important to you tomorrow. People moved on to other priorities. There was nobody there standing there saying, but wait, we're losing sight of this important asset.
It's hard, and it's got to be enculturated, right, Todd? The culture has to really be embracing it, and that's the hard bit, which is, I mean, this forum's talked about this a lot. It's the organisational change management that's associated with it. The enculturation of data governance is very difficult to make sort of a fabric of the organisation.
Yeah. So, I mean, all it takes is a change of swapping out a few executives, and the team's start following the new executive and moving on to other things. And
Yeah, my boss said, my boss
said that wasn't important anymore. Now we're going to go and do that. Okay. I like working. I want to do what my boss says.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Karen has asked, what do you think of Irwin? It is highly interactive with the database, the DBs, the databases.
I am not an Irwin expert. I know that it's a well-respected tool, but there are along with a suite of others as well. I'm not a proponent of Irwin or a detractor from Irwin. I know that the things that we're asking these tools to do are becoming increasingly challenging because we no longer just want a data modeler, we want a data profiler, and we want a metadata manager, and we want to be able to do lineage and a whole range of other things. And I imagine if I was out trying to purchase a data management suite, I'd be finding it pretty tough to find them. I mean, when I was buying integrated suites, I was responsible for the trying to implement the IBM Information Management Suite, which combined content management, document management, and records management in a single solution. And I learned a lot of lessons there about how little companies like IBM do to really integrate the packages they buy from other vendors. And I got to the point of saying, how long have you owned this package? Because if they hadn't owned a pack for more than a few years, I wasn't going to go there. So watch out for blue rinsing, or whatever the current equivalent of blue rinsing
Blue rinse.
They just blue rinse the packages and move on. Yeah.
On that point, Mark's asked the question, at a platform level, do you think one should buy or build?
Platform, what sort of platform?
So data storage and compute, ETL, data management overall.
I would always buy before build. I think you look at organizations that are struggling with the homegrown ETL package, and now they're trying to bring it into the up to currency. It's just very, very hard. You want to pick a vendor that's going to be around for a while, that will keep their product up to date, and look for good ways to integrate it. Either I don't think that I'm very suspicious of integrated packages. I think it's probably, if I was in that, well, I'd probably be looking for some best of breed solutions with some clear integration platforms. But I think if you're going to do that, then the thing you need to do at the very first thing is prove that the packages integrate, because often they don't.
Okay. Have we got any more questions from the group for Todd while we've got him? Got a few comments coming up, which is great. I think that exhausts the actual questions.
Good, because that exhausts me too.
Well, Todd, look, I want to say thank you very much. It's always a pleasure having a chat with you, and I think that the insights that you've given tonight have been extremely helpful to our group here in Brisbane.
Hope so. If anybody has any follow-up questions that they want to ask, please just send them to John, and he'll get them through to me, and we'll provide some, either give you a call back or send you something in writing.
Okay, and this session is being recorded, and so hopefully we'll get it up on YouTube in the not too distant future, so you can see it over again.
Fantastic.
So I think we'll leave it for tonight. Thank you so much. Thanks, Todd, and thanks everyone for attending. Good night.
Night, everyone. Take care.